Welcome back to CleanTitans. Today we're taking a unique approach to the climate conversation by exploring the power of fiction. We have with us George Sandy Lawrence, a retired physician, former associate professor of medicine, and now a climate fiction author. Sandy, welcome to the show.
It's a delight to be here.
We're thrilled to have you. You've had a fascinating career, and now you're using your knowledge and passion to write about climate change. To start, could you tell us a bit about your background and what led you to write climate change?
I will do that indeed. So I went to a public high school in St. Louis growing up, then came out to Stanford undergraduate, where I had professors like Paul Ehrlich and John Holdren. Holdren was the science advisor for
The
Obama.
legends.
Yes, for both administrations with Obama. I was interested, though, I think, even in high school, about nuclear proliferation and overpopulation, and so focused on those as issues to be concerned about. I developed then more of an environmental ethos as time went on. So even when I went through med school and started teaching medical students and residents, I would slip in an occasional lecture on an energy topic like coal power or nuclear power or geothermal, and the residents seemed to actually enjoy that. Most of my career actually was academic, a little bit over half. But then after I retired, now over a decade ago, I decided I would continue teaching. And so I've given lecture series at the university in Bellingham, Western Washington University. I've lectured at a couple of different conferences out of state, and I just enjoy continuing to teach. I've really been a teacher all of my life.
Excellent. You have a strong background in medicine and infectious disease. How does your experience in science and medicine inform your climate fiction writing?
I'm going to start with a disclaimer, first of all. That is, I'm not a climate scientist. Now, I am a scientist in the sense not that I went to med school and not that I taught medicine, but rather because I worked with 10 different experimental drugs back when I was doing teaching in the 80s and 90s. Nine of them were antibiotics, and one was a different category of drug. So I'm a scientist, yes, but I really would characterize myself as a jack of all trades and master of only a few. And those few would be infectious disease and obstetrics, for example. But again, I'm a talented amateur only when it comes to climate science itself.
Do you see parallels between addressing infectious disease and addressing climate change?
I think that's an excellent question. I would answer, I think, yes. But let me tell you my own personal story along those lines. In that, in climate fiction, I have found that the basic concept for me, the thesis that I have clearly, is that the great majority of people would not be interested in picking up a textbook on climate or on energy topics and reading that. But if I can write a book that actually incorporates several different narrative lines that initially seem independent, but then begin to intertwine, that may draw them in so that they can end up reading and learning about those various topics. I should backtrack just for a moment and describe what climate fiction is. Because the most common question that I get from people when I say that that's what I write, climate fiction or cli-fi, they ask, as you can guess, what's that? And my answer is simple. If there are a number of events in the plot line, such as floods, droughts, haboobs or windstorms or dust storms, all the different things that can happen, all the different sorts of climate disasters, climate almost becomes another character in the novel. So that is my intent, to try and reach out to a general population that ordinarily would not read technical information, research articles, and that sort of thing. And I hope that it works.
You've written a series of books including Climate Dragon, Cloud Dragon, and Fossil Dragon. What's inspired you to create this series, and what are the overarching themes you explore?
So this is a series that is a trilogy. They have the same four main characters in all three of them. The picture on the front of all three of these is a dragon head of one type or another. So what I have to tell people is that there's no element of fantasy in this. There's no actual dragon, as you might see in mythology, but instead the dragon is simply a metaphor for the oncoming climate deterioration that's affecting all of us already.
Why did you choose the dragon as a central symbol in your series?
It's kind of hard to say what the roots of that might be. maybe it was Game of Thrones or something of that sort. But I've always been interested, I suppose, in dragons and mythology. There are, of course, some actual real dragons, like the Komodo dragons in Indonesia, that sort of thing. But it just is a strong symbol that I think both kids and adults can appreciate. And so it is fun to have that in there. And in fact, I make an effort to have one brief mention of the word dragon in almost every chapter in the books. People would notice that as they read along. I should mention that of those three titles that you mentioned, the first one, Climate Dragon, came out a year ago. The second one, Cloud Dragon, is scheduled for release in June of this year. And the last one, Fossil Dragon, should be coming out sometime next year.
Nice. Climate Dragon was published in spring of 2024.
Correct.
Without giving away too much, what is the central conflict or challenge that the characters face in the book?
So the central character is Jake Harper. Jake is a young, idealistic, last year student in electrical engineering and getting his doctorate, his PhD, at a university in Washington, D.C. It's George Washington University, in fact. And he is so concerned about the climate that he has dedicated his life to working on repairing and re-engineering the electric grids of North America, and also to teach that to all of his students at the same time. His partner, Abby London, is a specialist in infectious disease. She is in her last year of her fellowship and training in that. And she also is concerned about climate change, but for a different reason. She's concerned about emerging and exotic tropical diseases that are vector borne, that are carried by ticks and by mosquitoes and that sort of thing. And so she spends a lot of her time focusing on that. Now, the two of them together are operating Dragonfly Inn, which is her parents' inn, and it's in Northern Virginia, about 20 minutes on the Orange Line of the Metro from the center of Washington, D.C. So it's easy to get there. Her parents are working overseas, and that's why they're out of the picture for the most part. Now, along the way, Jake, at one of the public lectures that takes place at the university, runs into an odd fellow that he begins to suspect then, and especially more later, might be planning an attack on a major portion of the electric grid. And Abby, who is not only an infectious disease expert, but also pregnant, has to begin working with patients in Washington, D.C. that seem to be having a new disease that has not been seen previously in the Western Hemisphere. My background, again, is infectious disease. I could have chosen 100 different infectious diseases that would work well along these lines. So she has to personally and professionally deal with that particular disease. So all these narrative lines, two lines of romance, one of infectious disease, one of the lone wolf terrorist, everything going on with the climate, all the maturation of Jake as a teacher, all these things intertwine at the end and come to, I think, a pretty satisfactory conclusion. I would comment, though, that in this genre of climate fiction, which I always have to explain to people, the great majority of them, even by some of the best writers, and probably the dean of climate fiction, is Kim Stanley Robinson. Imitation or Ministry for the Future is one of his, and I've read several of his books, and they all seem to be about 700 pages long, but they're good books. But most of these books, and I'm not, he likes to go by Stan, so I'm not picking an argument just with Stan alone, but I think most of these that I have read, and I've read a fair number to get an idea of what my genre is, most of them are post apocalyptic and pessimistic. And my books, on the contrary, are pre apocalyptic and optimistic because I am at heart a very strong optimist. Now, that's not to say that the endings of all three books are not complex. I'm not saying that people don't become ill, people die, that a terrorist attack may happen, actually in one or two of the books. I'm just saying that in the end, people will realize that they have learned a lot about the things I'm talking about. Climate Dragon, of course, deals with issues of climate. Sound Dragon deals with other issues in terms of energy systems. And Fossil Dragon is really is actually the first book of the three in the series, so it will be the last published. And it's really the developing relationships so that the two romantic lines take place more in that book. So it's a fun set of books. I've enjoyed reading them. The other two, besides the published book, the other two have completed manuscripts, but manuscripts are never really complete until the day of the launch of the book.
Absolutely. I really like that you're focusing on an optimistic future with climate change. How do you balance the scientific accuracy of climate change with the fictional elements of your story?
That's an important question, not just an interesting one. And that is, I've worked hard, in spite of the fact that all these characters are fictional, every single one, to make sure there's complete verisimilitude everywhere else in the book. So all the points made about climate, about energy systems, all the geographic locations, the university in Virginia, and a side trip that's taken to Pennsylvania for several chapters. All those are as close to actual reality as I could possibly accomplish. Now, in saying that, I will confess now that I ignored the basic idea you're supposed to write about what you know. And actually, I had never been to that part of Virginia. I had never been to George Washington University, and I'd never been to that part of Pennsylvania where there's an interesting dam that is part of their exploration. I say that in that I got lots of information about those locations. I even used Google Earth Street View to look at the dam and all those other sorts of things. And I will also say that my wife and I took a trip back east last year to visit her family in upstate New York. But we also went to Washington, D.C. We went to the actual street where Dragonfly Inn would have been. I won't give you the name of the street, so I won't irritate those neighbors. We also went to the university, and as luck would have it, the one large auditorium called Lehman Auditorium in one of the buildings of George Washington was holding a cybersecurity conference that day. And basically, security was tight and they wouldn't let me in to even look at what the slides were. So I had to talk to some of the people, and it was interesting. And I want, this is not really giving away, this is not a spoiler. In The Dragon, which is published, the attack that the Lone Wolf Terrace is planning is a cyber attack. So I even talked to them about that, but I'm not going to tell you what the target was or what the outcome of the attack was. So, yes, I am, in that sense, writing about what I know. And again, I worked as hard as I could to make every other detail as strictly scientifically and geographically accurate as I could. And then I made up all the characters.
You're using fiction to engage with climate change. What do you believe is the power of storytelling in raising awareness and motivating action on climate?
Having been a teacher all of my life, I have to say I think storytelling and use of humor is done excellently by really good teachers. That every teacher needs to be a good storyteller. There are some who are so rabid about the importance of climate change literature that they think that all books should be about climate change at this point. I'm not like that. I think there could still be books that are not about climate change. But I think people need to have an awareness of what's going on. And as much as that gets into literature, this is actually, of course, climate fiction is a subset of science fiction. And science fiction for generations, for many decades, has been something that explores what might be a future reality and often does actually come to pass. So, yes, all those apocalyptic climate fiction books, some of that, unhappily, may actually come to pass.
Who is your target audience for the Climate Dragon series? And what impact do you hope to have on them?
Also, another interesting question. I would say that I sometimes wondered and discussed with friends in one of the writing groups that I'm in whether or not I should not have done dragon heads on the covers of the book because people look at the title and they look at that. And I was at a book event just yesterday. And at that book event, this was actually a large mall. There were about 40 of us writers there. We all had a table set up and we were pitching our books and selling books. And it's always fun to directly interact with people. So what I would do is if a family came by with kids, I'd say, hey, kids, come look at these dragons. And they say, now I've got to tell you, there are no dragons in this book. There's no real dragon. And by then I've drawn the parents in and it gets them into the conversation. So would I do it again the way I did? Absolutely. Nonetheless, it may be a little bit misleading for people. No real dragons. Don't be disappointed. And the reason, my target audience then, anybody who is on the edge of wanting to know more about climate, in polling, the clear majority of Americans, even now, think that climate is something that the federal government should be addressing. So they think it's serious. They think it's important. Most people accept the idea that it's real, that it's serious, that it's caused by humans, and that we have to do something about it, but they don't feel they have any personal agency. So my target audience is anybody high school age, a bright high school student, high school age and older, who can be drawn in, learn about climate, and think about the idea of becoming more active in a political sense. That is my target audience. So basically, it's almost everybody above the age of 16 who.
Hopefully, these books will turn into series or movies.
Well, that would be wonderful, but that would be, here's a story I often tell. When I was 17 and working at a summer camp in Missouri, my home state, I was born in Minnesota, I was at a summer camp working as a counselor, and I and my junior counselor were getting our kids out of the lake. We'd just gotten out of the lake because there was a storm coming in. Lightning struck a couple hundred yards away, a tree right next to the lake, and we both felt it and jumped. So I had been struck by lightning, but I think my chances of actually having these books made into a movie, I think that would be like a lightning strike. It's not impossible, but the odds are pretty darn low.
Well,
You never know what your future holds.
climate fiction or cli-fi is a growing genre. What are the unique contributions in transition?
I think sci-fi helps people look at what the future may be if we don't actually address the energy transition and the solutions that we need to climate change. As a genre or subgenre, it's been around since at least 2005. There was about a 5 minute story on NPR. I guess it sort of hit the mainstream. And I mentioned earlier that Kim Stanley Robinson is probably considered the dean of this special area. I think the more that we get people to read about climate, even in the form of fiction, the more likely they are to get interested in it and get involved. So that is my clear intent.
How can cli-fi help us imagine and prepare for the challenges and opportunities of a clean energy future?
I'm glad you mentioned opportunities. It is a challenge, yes, but they're both good and bad things that we're dealing with in terms of climate change. It's hard to say precisely. I think that if people actually decided that they had learned enough about climate that they wanted to personally get involved and they wanted to study that in college, they wanted to take up a degree that would help deal with that. They wanted to get involved in energy systems. I think if people also are motivated to think about getting their first electric vehicle, to get some solar panels for the roof of their house and that sort of thing, I think that's nothing but wonderful. When people tell me that they have bought solar panels or that they have bought an electric vehicle or at least a hybrid vehicle, the one thing I say to them, thank you for helping. This is wonderful. I'm glad you did that. Now, I am so far personally committed that this is my 12th year of driving a pure EV, a battery electric vehicle. And just recently, just in the last month or so, I finally got through all the bureaucratic paperwork and got my electric meters upgraded to even smarter electric meters. And now I am set up with the level 2 chargers in each of our garages so that my battery is interactive with a local utility. That means that when I'm plugged in, which is all the time now, as long as I'm not out driving somewhere, the utility through the level 2 charger has interacted with the battery of my vehicle. So there's bidirectional flow of information and bidirectional flow of electrons. So if they need an additional little aliquot of electricity, they can take up to about 1% or so out of the battery, not harming its performance at all. If I need to interrupt in the middle of what they're doing, that's not a problem. And likewise, if they have a little bit of extra power available, say, for example, a wind farm had signed on for the next hour or the next 24 hours to produce a certain amount of electricity, but then they had more than they had anticipated, even with the really seriously sophisticated meteorological,
Strong wind.
yes, stronger wind, more power. And so then they have a little bit of extra electricity. They're not sure whether. So one car battery makes only a small difference. But if you have an intermediary in distributed power, distributed storage, then you could go ahead and aggregate, say, 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 car batteries, most of which would be available because most cars are not driven most of the time. And that actually will help the grid, help the utility stabilize voltage, stabilize frequency, and otherwise make a better grid. Our grid is old, it's dilapidated. Some of the components, like some of the wooden poles, are more than a century old. This is the grid that your grandparents would be familiar with, and we need to do a whole lot of change. The one most pertinent change that I can think of would be to increase the amount of high voltage long distance transmission. And in this country, the problem is that there are a lot of obstacles in the whole permitting process. It's very hard to put in a new high power line. In some areas that can be undergrounded, for example, under rivers and so forth. But basically, that's one of the key challenges. I'm actually with the current, this is a little bit off topic, but with the current administration in office, one of the things I've been glad to see is that they are behind trying to streamline the permitting process for infrastructure such as high voltage, long distance transmission of electricity. And actually, another thing that I would compliment is apparently they are quite okay with the idea of geothermal. perhaps because they can use the same people that work in the oil and gas industry to do the drilling required to put in a geothermal system. So I have some hopes along those lines that that may still continue to progress with the current recording. I don't want to get too far into politics. Let's say I'm not quite as sanguine about how things are going with wind power. But solar power, again, off topic, but just last year we added 50 gigawatts of solar in the United States. A gigawatt is a billion watts. Utilities think in terms of megawatts, so each gigawatt is 1,000 megawatts. But the simplest comparison is a gigawatt is equivalent to the nameplate rating of a typical nuclear power plant. So we added last year 50 of those. Now, solar isn't available 24/7 the way nuclear is, but it is available for essentially 20% at full power. And so if you even divide by 5, yes, 50 total, but 10 gigawatts of solar equivalent round the clock added last year. Solar plus storage, of course. And there's no way you could ever build 10 nuclear power plants in 1 year. We're doing that much more slowly, not very effectively. And for economic reasons alone, since it's going to be much higher price electricity, that is not the solution. And that's important to bring that up because there are a lot of environmentalists who are now strongly backing nuclear power that they would have opposed, say, decades ago. I'm still on the side that we need to be rational about the economic decision making of the grid with the grid. And so avoiding nuclear actually is in our interest. But I don't
And
even
this
have
solar is distributed and scalable. You can have as much or as little solar as possible. And
yes.
if you have millions of electric cars connected like your car, you can have a distributed storage system, a whole power plant that can, car you said just sits there most of the time. So it can actually be sending power in the evening, making money for you. And then at night, when the wind is blowing, middle of the night, there's plenty of power. It can charge it up for the next day or
Valid
during the
points.
middle of the day when there's a lot of sun, a lot of solar energy. You can
Yes,
charge
yes.
at that time and then sell the power in the evening at high rates. And
I should mention what our local utility is doing along those lines. What they in the advertising for this, they said they would send me a $50 check, which I haven't seen yet, by the way, and then they would pay, I think, 50 cents each time they dip into my battery a little. Well, if I get up in the middle of the night and look out from my bedroom window, I can look into the garage and I can see that sometimes the light is turned on there so that it is actually either charging or discharging that battery just a little bit. And it's supposed to give me 50 cents for that each time. But the concept of people making money off the car battery or their home battery, this is actually a very valid business model, especially if you have an aggregator, an intermediary that can gather together multiple different batteries. So we have
right.
backup batteries in our house. We have my car. My wife's the car is a plug-in hybrid, so that probably won't get involved. And then at the additional dwelling unit, the rental unit next door, different battery system, different battery chemistry. Um, and we have a level 2 charger there, but most of the time our tenants are not people that have an EV. So we can't set it up there. So for now, I'm just getting the experience with and loving the idea of being interactive with the grid.
Your books address energy and grid issues. How do you portray the complexities of the energy transition in your fiction?
There is an awful lot to discuss. It's an overwhelming amount of material. And yet, for as much as I put into the 3 books, what I have to say is I left out more than I put in. I study every day. I read hours every day in these various issues. And in fact, I spend more time now having a daily blog post about energy and climate issues than I do actually writing and editing my books. And it's been very enjoyable on multiple social media, 8 that I use on every day, and then some others where I have a big announcement like another publication. To be able to interact with all those people. In fact, that's how you and I met on LinkedIn. You heard about me, and I'm so grateful that you reached out and said you'd like to have a discussion like this. So, how is that important? Again, there's so many components to this. I could some of the chapters in the books all talk about various energy issues. For example, there'll be 2 chapters that talk about geothermal and heat pumps as sort of different but related issues. And so I go into a great amount of detail with hopefully some humor and also some very interesting and distinctive people that are doing the lecturing. It's not all done by Jake.
What are some of the key energy related challenges you explore in your series?
The first is to realize that of all the different energy systems that we have, whether renewable or not, cannot take the place of a primary and initial focus on energy efficiency. Amory Lovins from the Rocky Mountain Institute, based at Snowmass, Colorado, is probably one of the first and main people who has been promoting this for many years. And I've read a number of his books. And I've actually met him and had a weekend conference with him in California many years ago, early 1980s. Energy efficiency is always going to be faster, easier, and cheaper than any kind of energy system. Even when solar gets down to 1 cent per watt to be able to set up an installation, it is still cheaper to do something that is energy efficient. So that always comes first. And I emphasize that, actually, especially in the book that has been published already. Efficiency would be an example of efficiency that's pertinent would be if the common one that people use is the idea of having LED light bulbs. If you put in an LED, you're using only about 10% of the electricity that an incandescent bulb. And an incandescent bulb, by its very design, needs to have a filament that heats up hot enough to start glowing, like your toaster. But it's a less robust filament and it has no oxygen inside the bulb. And that's why it doesn't instantly fail. So that is how incandescent bulbs eventually do fail. So energy efficiency in all of its guises is really always the best way to go.
Solar is already down to 1 cent
I
in
know.
many parts of the world.
I'm excited. There's a nice story about Pakistan, in fact. I don't know if you've been following this story. Pakistan has a even more complex grid with a lot of outages taking place and is a country that's working hard to develop itself. They had a total grid, I think it was 37 gigawatts, and the price of solar dropped in Pakistan mainly because China had been overproducing them. There were no barriers to selling to Pakistan from China, as there are in other parts of the world. And so they were basically letting them go for down to 10 cents per watt. So if you had, say, 400-watt photovoltaic panel, solar panel, you're paying $40 for it. And that is dramatically less than I'm sure I paid for the panels that I put up in going back all the way to 2002 when I put a panel on my own shop. I like to do all of my own wiring, for example. Anyway, so yes, that is an amazing story. So they have added 20 gigawatts just in the last couple of years. They've added 20 gigawatts on almost all of it is rooftop solar that people are helping with their neighbors or even carry around on a truck and use that to set up power for somebody for a while. It's actually more stable, more reliable than using the main grid. So from 37 gigawatts, they've gone to 57 gigawatts, I guess. It's been amazing. I'm sorry, more actually. So it's a huge difference.
Yeah, the payback there is like a year and a half,
Yep.
which is amazing.
Yep. The fuel is always free. It's always going to be there.
Yes, panels are warranted for 25 years, but I've seen panels working here in the United States that are over 30 years old. So that was old technology, and now the technology's improved so much.
I'd make a similar comment actually about batteries. The batteries in cars, for example, were tested, as you can imagine, as sort of a benchtop test. They would charge up the battery and then run it down and then immediately charge up again and just do that repeatedly at a rapid repeat rate. And it turns out that in the actual use case of an electric vehicle battery, so they've been saying that they're warranted for 8 years or 10 years. Turns out that EV batteries are going to last 40% longer than anticipated because the actual use is different than the benchtop testing done years ago.
Because you're not at those extremes. If you're charging and discharging, especially for V2G, if you do V2G, then you actually extend the life of the battery because you're not at the extreme long periods of time.
Got it.
Yeah, so it's amazing that batteries
exciting
actually
stuff.
outlast cars. People don't realize that.
Yeah.
They have second life after the car is done.
I should comment a couple of things about climate change that are interesting to me because of my medical background. People are aware of some of the main problems, the sea level rise and king tides and storm surge and acidification. One they may not be aware of is deoxygenation. For several complicated reasons that I won't go into in detail, there's some parts of the ocean that are going to be having oxygen levels that drop down below where shellfish and fish can survive on it. And that is going to be a problem in the coming decades. But just from a medical point of view, we know there are going to be longer allergy seasons now. Historically, there were sort of 4 allergy seasons in much of the country. There'd be an 8-week one with grass pollen in the spring. And then in the middle, there would be other flowering plants. And then at the end, in those parts of the country that have ragweed, and sort of three different 8-week long allergy seasons. But now that's merging into just one longer season. As it gets warmer and in some places wetter at the same time, they were seeing just a prodigious amount of pollen. So allergies are a dilemma. Another one is kidney stones. A lot of people will never have a kidney stone in their life, but as the climate gets hotter and they tend to be dehydrated and they're stressed by heat, the urine is concentrated, so they're more likely to end up having a kidney stone. So there's just a whole lot of reasons to try and get this under control. And as you and I have just discussed, I am an optimist about this. I think we have agency. I think we all do. I think we need to get involved, get organized, do it at the local level, do the things that you can do, but it is not enough just to recycle and say that that's good enough, that you're always helping protect the climate. I think one other thing to think about seriously is the idea of doing one less airplane flight per year. And I know that's hard, but I try and get it. And I can't tell you I've had great luck persuading my friends about this. Our last big trip for me internationally was in 2015, and I've been reading so much and writing so much about Greenland, I had to go see Greenland. So part of the trip involved going to Norway, because I'm a quarter Norwegian ancestrally, flying to Svalbard, 500 miles north of there, and then taking a 2-week cruise that went down along Greenland and then ended up in Iceland. It was a wonderful trip. I had a great time. Big ice for me is the most gorgeous thing in the natural world. I love kayaking out in it and so on. But I then said to my wife, I'm not going to travel overseas anymore. The exception would be in Hawaii because we live on the West Coast. We have 4 relatives that live on the Big Island. So I will continue to go there from time to time. And I will travel in North America. I'll travel to Central America. In fact, in December, we took a trip that went to El Salvador because they had a 2-day geothermal conference. It was wonderful. My Spanish is, I would say, serviceable. And even at the end of the day part, 2 day, then if I'd like to be in a video, well, they didn't really offer me a choice. They said, okay, we'd like to have you talk about how you've been in El Salvador and what you think about geothermal. So I held my own for about 3 minutes. It was a great trip. We had a wonderful time. And yes, we did spend some time in the beaches after that. We were there for a full week. So I will travel that far. I'll probably get to Panama someday. I've been to Cuba. I want to go to Puerto Rico, which is, of course, still the United States. And so I will do that kind of traveling. My wife is not here, so I can say that she is not particularly happy about this. But I think it's very important to think seriously. You can undo almost every other good work that you do over the course of a year by taking one long plane flight. I have friends who love to go to New Zealand, to Australia, and unless they have family that they're visiting there, I think they need to think really carefully about making that decision.
I'm going to be talking to somebody from Norway involved in the electrification of their vehicles, which they've done amazing in a
Yes,
couple
they
of
have.
weeks.
Yes.
In your opinion, what are some of the most pressing issues that the clean energy transition community needs to address, and how can storytelling help in this process?
I think I've kind of covered what is accomplished by having storytelling going on about this. I mean, that's certainly my fervent belief. I've been putting in all this time to get this done ever since 2019 when I started writing. What needs to be done, though, is for the grid to be upgraded. That's got to be a primary thing for me. And to really work hard on geothermal, because that can provide 10 to 20% of our total energy, not just electricity, but actually total energy, including process heat and district heating as well. I'm not sure what else to say about what we need to get done. We need to try and reverse as much of the changes that have taken place at the federal level in terms of reconstituting NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. We need to get the EPA again protecting us with clean water and clean air. And we need to, this is kind of off topic, I guess, a bit with climate, but RFK Jr., I think, is doing impossible to estimate harm by his focus on suppressing the vaccination and relying on supplements and vitamin A to try and treat a serious disease like measles. The current measles outbreak taking place in this country, it's estimated there probably are 4 times the numbers that are reported of documented cases. Oftentimes, they're finding in Texas in particular that children and adults are kept at home until they're really sick and need to be in the hospital and sometimes need to be on a ventilator to get them through the disease. It's a serious disease. About 20% develop measles, pneumonia, and some develop encephalitis. Vaccination will help with that. I'm not sure how that helps with climate change, but climate change is certainly going to be affecting the array of diseases that we see. We have
Well,
mosquitoes that can carry a number of different infections that we should be concerned about. Dengue is one, which had been essentially eradicated from this country, but then came back to Hawaii and now is in Florida, and I think Texas and some other places as well. I think much more important than that actually is the idea of the changing demographics. Countries that are suffering now negative growth rate, which is actually a very positive thing. Paul Ehrlich, just as a back of the envelope calculation, strode across the stage one time in a lecture and said, I think the carrying capacity of the planet is about 2.5 billion people. Well, obviously that wasn't based on really hard evidence, but he certainly was a man who knew a lot about population to special area, mainly about butterflies, of course. But to have the population drop in an overcrowded country like China is actually a very good thing, and they should be happy about that. South Korea is maybe going a little bit too far. Japan is down to a replacement rate of about zero point 0.7, when normal replacement rate for a woman in her lifetime should be 2.1.
can you give an example of a specific clean energy technology and concept that you've explored in your fiction?
Well, I really would like to claim, and I'd be happy if someone challenges at some point, by the time all three books are done, that I will have discussed every single possible energy system available to us at this point, aside from human and animal muscle. But every technological energy system that we have is covered there.
Not
I do address those. And even some of the really niche ones like thermoelectric and piezoelectric, piezoelectric generation. Have you ever piezoelectric?
Mhm.
Yep. And most people would say they don't realize that the lighter that they use for lighting the barbecue has a little tiny crystal in it that you hit with a little hammer when you pull the trigger, and that generates a tiny electric spark that lights the propane for you. Actually, no, I'm sorry, it's butane inside the like that. So
I'm
yes,
really excited about cooling technologies that
yes.
use these coatings that can cool, and they're trying to integrate that with textiles and clothing. So that would
I have
nice.
seen that too. That sounds interesting. There are also some if you look at the evaluation of the vapor compression cycle in refrigerators that we've been using, refrigerators and freezers that we've been using for a long time, they were only about 60% effective in terms of the cooling that's accomplished. There's some newer technologies like twisto electric or twisto caloric rather that could be even more efficient than what we currently use. So we think that as
I-
of the
I-
refrigerator, something that's been around for a long time, but technological advance could help there as well.
Yeah, I'm excited about those electrical cooling systems, solid state
Yes,
electrical cooling systems. We have induction cooking in Europe and Asia for 40 years that is just coming to US now. We have a long way to go. We can adopt
induction
so many
cooktops. Go ahead.
We have so many technologies that can. Well, I think we have all the technologies that we need to solve this problem. We just need the wheel now.
We do. People that are actually very knowledgeable in this area say we don't need any new technologies to accomplish the energy transition. We have everything off the shelf that we need to get done what we need to get done. So first efficiency, then the renewables, upgrading the grid, upgrading the appliances, heat pumps, induction cooktops. I'll tell you a little story about induction cooktops. My wife was very hesitant about that idea. I had to take her to three different friends that had one to have her boil water or scramble an egg before she was finally willing to have us have an induction cooktop instead of a gas cooktop. And now that she has it, we both love it. We'd never use anything else. It's not putting fumes through the way that either propane or methane and natural gas would do. And it's super fast, very clean, and we just love it. It's also a
And
great hot plate. If you have an induction cooktop on your counter and you take something out of out of the oven or out of the microwave, you can set it directly on it. It's like a big, huge hot plate.
you can just cook on those induction cooktops for apartment dwellers. Those
Absolutely.
those little plates,
Yes,
induction
you can
plates.
even get one that kind of hangs over the end of the. You pick it up, set it down. You need to have an adequate electric circuit, often one that is dedicated just to the cooktop, though.
There's a company that's adding batteries to induction cooktops to increase
Wow.
their power. So you don't need a circuit. So there's solutions for everything. There's a guy I was talking to last week, and they have little robot battery chargers that would go around in a parking lot of a building or apartment building or anywhere. and they would just go, this flat, they go under they charge the car
Wow.
remotely. You just park it anywhere. You don't have to have charging stations all over everywhere. These robots, a bunch of robots can come your car up.
It sounds like
How
a movie. My only reservation about that, I've heard, is that you may not get as efficient transmission of electricity as you do with a direct cable connection.
right,
I'm
but
still going to be old school at this point. I want to plug my car in. I toyed
yeah,
with the idea when we had our house built 6 years ago of getting one of those devices that would just sit in the garage floor and would charge your car and you wouldn't have to plug it in. But I decided on balance that I wasn't going to do that.
yeah, but for an apartment complex where it would
Yes.
be very hard to dig up the whole place and install wiring and cables and charging
Hmm.
infrastructure, if and you can't just switch out a car, you're not going to get up in the middle of the night to go move your car.
No, I'm not.
Right? So if there's a robot that would do that for you in the middle of the night, then yeah, you lose some efficiency, but you can get the job done for everybody in the apartment building.
Yeah. One key thing in new construction, and this is something else that we should all be working on. A number of cities have done this so far, where any new construction permitting disallows use of natural gas. And that is very important. They actually have, there's healthier indoor air if you're not using natural gas. In a natural gas cooktop, it actually releases or leaks more methane over the course of 24 hours than it does when you're actually using it. So it is healthier to have it not there. So first of all, not allowing gas into new construction. Secondly, if you are even contemplating sometime in the future, maybe the next owner after you might want to have an electric charger, you don't have to install the charger. You just need to install the circuitry. So you have, say, a dedicated 50 amp electric circuit each bay so that at some point in the future, somebody could just plug it in and charge the car. I've installed about three or four, five of those. One in my son's home, so I've done that. It's actually quite easy to do. Not just the plug-in part, but I mean I've actually done the wiring because I like doing that sort of thing.
You've had a long career outside of writing. How do you think your past experiences have shaped your perspective on the clean energy transition and climate action?
Well, I certainly had a long time when I was not doing writing. I do not have an MFA. Did have an excellent creative writing teacher in the 8th grade, and then I waited about 50 years or so before I started writing. It was in 2019. I'd been retired for some years at that point. It was just pre-COVID by not that many months. And so then I decided that if I had any capability needed, just get started and work on it myself. Is the writing helping in terms of educating people about achieving climate change? I think so. I would like to think so. Certainly, I've enjoyed doing it. I think the blogging is almost as important as what I'm doing in terms of the books. And I never charge. The only thing I monetize in the books, I don't try and do. I don't have people sign up for any of the blogging work that I do.
What are some of the key lessons you've learned from your diverse careers that you apply to your writing on climate and energy?
Well, one obvious thing is, yes, my whole career was in medicine, and I blame the family curse for that. My father was a doctor, my grandfather was a doctor, our son's a doctor, his wife's a doctor, my wife's a certified nurse midwife. Everybody in the family basically is, or almost everybody is medical. So that helped considerably because it made me think about infectious disease. So all the different chapters that deal with infectious disease of various types and all the other medical encounters, the chapters that deal with a medical encounter of some type, some of it due to trauma, I nailed those. I have all of that down. I have all that information. I know all the lingo. I know everything that's happening there. So that helped me considerably in writing those parts of the book. That was sort of what I'd been studying for an entire career. So that made it easy. I think if anybody does have a background in medicine, they'd be a perfect target audience because they would identify with everything that's discussed there. I would hope so.
You're active on social media and have a blog. How important is it for climate writers to engage with the public and foster dialogue about the climate change?
I think it's a moral challenge. I think that I even wrote in one of the books, not yet published, that at some point, anybody involved in medicine, for example, has an obligation to get involved with teaching the public. They cannot just be involved in practicing medicine. They really need to engage with the public, and they need to do it not in the passive sense of waiting for it to be approached, but by actively going out and finding forums where they can speak publicly. I love doing that myself. So
What are some of the challenges and opportunities of using different media platforms to communicate about climate?
Well, I can say in blogging, you have to. It's one of the first things I do in the morning after I've had breakfast is get online and figure out a blog for the day. Now that may entail reading 2 or 3 long articles. It could be from the newspaper, like the New York Times. It could be from a journal like Nature Climate Change or Nature Energy or Scientific American. We have obscure journals like the Journal of Atmospheric Chemistry and Physics. And then I have to decide after, sometimes I read one and I discard it, read one and discard it. I'll take notes on those articles that I'm studying, but it's not something that I can blog about, partly because some of them are more complex than I can condense down into a short post, a sort of 1 page post. And that is actually complicated, taking, say, a 5 page article that I decided actually would be perfect for the public that knows something about. And then I have to condense that down to a much shorter piece. It also requires a perfect picture. There has to be a photograph, a graph, or maybe a couple of them that are just perfect for drawing people in because they probably see that when somebody makes a post. They do see that. I know how this works. And that should help draw them in so they will actually read it and learn something. And I try and use a lot of humor. That helps too, I think. And I personalize it where I can.
What are your hopes and concerns for the future of the clean energy transition, and how do you reflect these in your writing?
I would say that the clean energy transition, regardless of what's going on politically and geopolitically around the world, is going to be unstoppable. Eventually, this is going to happen. It's just a question of how much opposition there will be, how protracted this will be, how long it's going to be with the current administration. But we will get this done. There's no question about it. I wish I could be even more optimistic about that. We already talked about how Pakistan has done with the solar. We can talk about how much solar was added to this country last year, 50 gigawatts. Again, those are reasons. And the sales of electric vehicles have continued to go up, 2024 more than 2023 and so forth. So this is all very exciting. I'm most distressed about the fact that offshore wind is not getting the support that it needs at the national level. It'll take a few years before we can catch up on that. And hopefully, off the west coast in California, they can do offshore wind, but they'll be floating wind turbines anchored at multiple sites down in the seabed because it's just a much steeper drop off. Continental shelf is very steep on the west coast.
Brazil just announced that they're going to do offshore wind.
Yes. They also have, and this is interesting, they also, though, have a very active oil and gas sector. Some of that is offshore. And every once in a while, I will hit a nerve, I guess, with a post that I do online, and I will get multiple people commenting, 30 and 60 and 100, but not just doing a like or not like, but they actually make comments. And one of them actually was from Petrobras a couple of days ago on a post that I had. Petrobras is the big oil company. That's the state oil company in Brazil. And he was talking about how we were going to, as the world, we're going to go to much higher use of oil and gas even than we have now. And I basically responded to him. And I don't get argumentative. I don't call names. I don't do ad hominem attacks. But I just say, okay, so what are your beliefs about climate change? What do you think we should be doing? What do you think is actually happening? A lot of these people, at least personally, are still in deep denial that climate change is happening. And that's something we have to work on. I know a lot of people that are politically distressed at this point in the United States. Say, I just can't deal with somebody who has that kind of belief. I, on the contrary, think that it is wonderful to engage with people of completely different social and political opinions. I'm happy to do that. I think there are always ways that you can find commonalities. You start with sports and the weather and go from there. And you don't need to get argumentative. And I think you actually can accomplish some attitude change in so doing. We can't leave anybody behind. We can't just say we're not going to talk to those people and they're not going to be important to me. No, we can't. We have to engage with everybody. So I make a real effort to do that every time I go out.
What message of hope or caution do you want readers to take away from your Climate Dragon series?
I think the hope, obviously, is that all these renewable energy systems and energy efficiency are really going to be able to accomplish what we need to do. The caution is if you don't do it fast, we're going to see some astonishing level of climate change that is not going to be a very happy experience for our children. I don't know if people think too much about climate and their children and grandchildren. There have been papers arguing that actually that doesn't make that much difference. But I think if they just think hard about it, they realize that the world that they might have grandchildren that'll be alive at the end of the century, for example. We have 4 grandkids. The youngest at this point is 8-ish. And I don't know that they're going to live that long, but it certainly would be possible. And so I do have to think about the longer term. In public speaking, though, and that's what this is, I don't talk about the end of the century. I specifically don't talk about anything past the end of the century, though any geologist, of course, deals with great spans of time. I don't do that. I don't think it's persuasive. I don't think it's important to people. So I don't like to talk about anything past 2050, actually, if I can get away with it. I will do it. I mean, sometimes you have to in terms of temperature change and so forth. But I try and stick to more or less the present. In fact, if I could stick to just going to 2040, which is 15 years from now, people can relate to that. And hopefully we can persuade them, get involved, do something, make your life count, and you will really enjoy it if you do. And we will all benefit from it if you do.
For aspiring writers or anyone wanting to use storytelling for climate advocacy, what advice would you give them?
Couple things. Go read some of the great writers in this area. And Kim Stanley Robinson comes to mind and others. If you really want to get involved, you can go ahead and read actual science writers that are writing for the general public. So people like Michael Mann, tons of good information, books that they do, that sort of thing. And you can also contact people. You can often find local people that are writers. I think almost any place has writers. We have boatloads of them here in Bellingham in Northwest Washington. I'm on 8 different social media almost every day, and so Facebook, LinkedIn, all those. Anyone who wants me can certainly do so. And I'd be happy to talk to them about climate fiction writing after they get past the stage of what is that? It's fun
Nice.
to do.
Nice. Well, you answered my next question. How can they connect with your work and learn more about your writing process?
Well, like any author, the best support you can is to go ahead and buy the book. And I think you actually would find it interesting. It is available. The first one that's out is available in paperback and in ebook. And in fact, on Amazon, you can go and read the first 5 chapters of Climate Dragon and see if that's something that would be something you'd be interested in. Audiobook coming out. And in fact, the audiobook is available kind of everywhere except on Audible, which is part of Amazon, because we're having trouble getting them to accept the cover art. I have a great graphic artist, but it's been taking time. It just takes longer. They are notorious for taking longer to get it, but within hopefully a few more weeks, we'll finally get it up on Audible as well. But for now, Spotify and almost any other place you can find it.
I couldn't find it on Google Books.
It should be because it is on Google Books, and I have the link for that. So I'm surprised that didn't work. Maybe I should check and see if that's working. I do have that link with what's been published.
Sandy, this has been a truly fascinating and unique conversation. Thank you for sharing your insights and your creative approach to the climate crisis with us and to our viewers. Thank you for joining us on Clean Titans. Please subscribe and follow us for more insights into the power of storytelling and the importance of climate action. Until next time, stay energized and keep creating.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed this a lot myself.